how do we build aspirational technology brands that can command premium unit economics in an era where production has been commoditized, where everyone is going to be able to generate this code? Welcome back to VBSR. Sarah, I feel like it's been a couple weeks, huh?
It's been a minute, and it's been busy. We've had an IPO. We announced our big Cursor investment. You've been in India, I think, celebrating the startup ecosystem there and sort of Accel's history. I'm hoping you'll tell me more, but yeah, it's been exciting times.
Circle IPO was, what a cool moment, you know? It's a
Amazing.
company that we co-led the Series A in 12, 13 years ago, and through their own long journey and path, you know, found themselves with this really special piece of infrastructure in the crypto space.
Yeah, it's really exciting to have those things at the same moment as we're on the early team having those nascent sort of early days conversations, because it really makes tangible the like 10-year overnight success of, you know, like we're looking at a Circle IPO, we're looking at the value created, and we're also talking to these, you know, kind of day zero founders and really trying to interrogate, you know, the degree to which they're committed to that sort of journey, that sort of, you know, hard work to build something of value.
Absolutely. There was an interesting graphic passed around social media last week just around the peak valuations of exits in a certain vintage. And 20, 30, 40 years ago, you really celebrated a $100 million sale or a $500 million sale. And we now need to stretch our minds to what's possible. You can have a multiple tens of billions of dollars IPO or strategic sale. And, you know, I think to your point, the journey is rife with risk, and it's a long one, but the opportunity to build something so meaningful and create so much value is far beyond anything any previous generation of investor has experienced.
And when it goes right, you know, our job is to think about, you know, what could this be if it goes right? But it's amazing that even when that's your job, we're all still, you know, surprised by how right something can go.
Absolutely.
You know, maybe we're actually not as unbounded in our thinking as we aspire to be. We still get surprised.
Something we're always pushing ourselves on.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, so I was in India last week.
What was the actual premise?
Yeah, so we, in conjunction with Forbes, announced our Forbes, you know, top 30 AI technologists in India.
Nice.
And we celebrated a number of India-born, India-native entrepreneurs, some that have since moved over to the States, like Arvind at Perplexity, or Ashwin over at Decagon, but a number of great founders that are still based in Bangalore. And I think it was just a moment to put a spotlight on a country that we think is going to yield some of the next big winners. You know, Sarah, I think visiting India, you come to appreciate geography as the original lowest level platform. You know, when you're a founder, you're thinking about starting a business, we think about all the canonical platforms that one is building upon, be it, you know, in the early days of social, okay, you're building on top of Facebook, or you're riding the network graph of Twitter, WhatsApp, LinkedIn. You know, increasingly that concept of platform may be shifted to AWS. Now it's about building on top of the foundation model companies like OpenAI and Anthropic. But beneath all of that is where you choose to found your company and the local advantages that you have to take advantage of, to tap into. And you know, one of the things that came out in those conversations, in addition to the history of the country with its BPOs, is, you know, the Indian founder, I think, is just willing to do the hard, messy work that you don't find everywhere. You know, things like systems integrations, solutions engineering. Founders out there, they run towards that work. And that was another feeling I left, was like, wow, as we enter this new age of AI technology, that is going to be such a core advantage. You know, geography as a platform, they can tap into that willingness to do the dirty work, to get things stood up. And I think that's going to play through in the next generation of the best companies. And that's why we'll hopefully see a lot of big winners from there. Everyone I met out there just has this infectious energy to want to build something really big and meaningful. And I think there's a deeper almost nationalism to how they think about things. You know, they want to build the first big Indian decacorn or, you know, company that can last over a century. One founder, he had this really interesting story. He was talking about, you know, the history of some of the biggest Indian corporations, the Reliances, the Tatas, Infosys, Cognizant, and just studying what those companies meant to the broader world and how, you know, he and his cohort of founders, you know, they want to surpass that. You know, they're so inspired to see what has been achieved ahead of them, and now there's an opportunity to build something even bigger. So I don't know. I left there feeling so energized, despite it's a 20-hour flight, so it takes a long time to get there.
That's remarkable to be energized after.
It takes a long time to get there. But what a really cool dose of energy coming out of India.
And you were in the halls or you know, at a time when I think Accel really invested in sort of this global team, really invested in India as a market for entrepreneurship. You know, at a time when really few were, you know, tell me about sort of the thinking and the rationale and sort of the discussion that happened around investing in that market specifically.
Yeah, you know, it wasn't obvious at the time. And, you know, I'd step back and say, first and foremost, building a global partnership is very hard. Partnerships are these really interesting organisms that you know, can feel chaotic at times and energizing at other times. And it's hard enough to build a really stable, enduring partnership in one office in one city, much less to do that across now 3 offices in 3 cities. We ended up finding a small partnership that had already existed, that we're already investing and had a small portfolio. And we just spent a lot of time with them. And I think over nights and dinners and drinks, realized that, you know, these are people that look and feel like Accel people to us, and let's join arms and try to build something greater. And since then, it's been a lot of trips back and forth. You know, it takes building that level of trust and camaraderie. You really can't do that over Zoom, and it's taken many years of hard, unscalable work to get to the position that we're in. But you know, I look at our India franchise and I would say they are absolutely number one in their market. They see all the best deals, all the best founders. And now it's just about continuing to build on that advantage.
Well, and I feel like people have talked about how it kind of takes a critical mass of, you know, almost a success to cascade those future founders. And I think now we're seeing, you know, those founders coming out of Flipkart, those founders coming out of Swiggy. It really does sort of compound over time, having those talent magnets where people can learn and grow together and build great skills around, building hard things, and then they can take that on to the next venture. So it's exciting to kind of see that evolution. You spoke about how the economy has really been dominant in a lot of this business processing work. Was there discussion about the major transformations happening in that category? You know, there's sort of you're painting the upside of we're experts in this category, we should be able to own the transformation.
Right.
There's the risk of this has been a major fuel of our economy. Right. How do we not, you know, lose ground or have instability as this category is kind of turned on its head? Right. What was the dialogue? What was the mood?
I felt the vibe was very optimistic. I think the one thing that really resonated with me was the ways in which founders in India paint AI not as a replacement for labor, but really as an augmentation to labor. And I think they have a real honor and respect for the human that's at the center of the equation and how to empower him or her. And, you know, we've talked about this as a partnership too. We hear this from enterprise Fortune 500 CIOs all the time. They don't want to hear founders coming in to pitch them on how we're going to save them a bunch of cost and rip humans out of the equation. They want to hear, how are we going to do so much more with the team that we have?
Okay, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask. We sort of tease you about being one of the more sensitive eaters on the team.
Yes.
Did you get out there and have some amazing Indian food? Did you burn your mouth? Did you have to, cry uncle? How did it go?
There's a soul to Indian food.
Yeah.
That spice, it's meant to come through in a very subtle way.
Yeah.
In America, we kind of cover over that spice a bit with a lot of butter and cream.
Yeah.
And as a result, we temper that soul.
Yeah.
We neuter that soul.
Yeah, yeah.
But you sense that soul in India.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's an energy.
Yeah.
That's a vim that I think everyone's got to experience.
Yeah. No.
Get out there.
No. This actually, I could not agree more. So I was living in India, for me, is coupled with the 2008 financial crisis.
Wow.
I was staffed there as a McKinsey analyst.
Why did I not know this?
I know. I feel like we would have covered this. So, and on that, the time that I lived there, I actually lived in sort of a dorm for analysts, which is not something you do in U.S. offices, but it's something that happens in the offices in India.
And which city were you in?
I was in Mumbai.
You were in Mumbai. Okay.
And then actually I was in Delhi the last month. So I split time. And I had just incredible, like, home cooked Indian food that I loved, like really, really enjoyed. And then I came back and was kind of searching for it. And it was like, this is creamy, this is heavy, this is buttery, this is not what I ate.
Yeah.
And so when I can find like very authentic Indian food, I really, really enjoy it and love it because it brings back some fond memories of that time.
Well, Sarah, so when you were there in 2008, you had an on-the-ground sort of front row seat to India at a really interesting point in time. Mm-hmm. Correct me if I'm wrong, but India, that was during the great financial crisis. There was obviously the terrorist attack in Mumbai. Obama had just been elected. I mean, it was a country that was experiencing rapid change. And at the same time, you had this rush of, the Indian middle class that was finally coming online. They were mobile native. I think credit card penetration was just starting to tick up. So there were all these forces percolating at the time. And I don't know, I'm curious if you were to comment on what it looked like to you on the ground in 2008 and just what you've observed has changed over the next 17 years.
As you did have this rising middle class and the financial crisis, we've made so much progress. There's been so much momentum to not want to lose that, to squander that and keep that trajectory. Like, what do we do to support? We've been elevating our role on the global economic stage, and that's not something that we are willing to sacrifice. And I think this is another moment where things are being shuffled, in a really dramatic way, where you're kind of going, where will the economic value be created? Where do we need to change and evolve very rapidly? And it comes as no surprise that you left that session, with an optimistic, tenor and sort of feeling like, wow, some great innovation is going to come out of this market, because I think that is the passion and urgency to sort of drive, propel forward is just palpable. Yeah. And I'm sure even more so than at that time.
Sarah, while I was in transit, it felt like there was a lot of chatter or conversation around just this concept of, I don't know, taste, design, feeling, aesthetic in modern software companies and how important that is. And there are a couple of really great essays that were written. It's something I think that we've been thinking about investing behind for a long time. And certainly we can appreciate taste through just the lens of Kari at Linear or the team over at Cursor or the Gamma guys, or why is it manifested to the top of everyone's inbox all of a sudden? Why is it so important? Is it important?
As production costs shrinks to zero, it becomes so easy to produce, you know? And so then the question is not like, have you made a thing or not? It's like, is your thing good, you know? Because to make a thing is just not, you know, that's no longer the gatekeeper, right? And so then in this world of just bountiful production, what matters? What do we care about? What emerges? And I think that's where people are trying to articulate why one thing breaks from the pack more than others. Because when that production is so cheap, and frankly, like pretty good too. It's not, you know, I think sometimes people talk about like AI slop. This isn't like this thing's beautiful, this thing's slop. It's like, no, you can actually produce a high quality that still doesn't punch through. And so I think this kind of discussion about what makes something punch through, that's more not just like a moment in time, but a way of producing, not just sort of a knowing your customer, but how you express that understanding of your customer. You know, that there's this nuance to it that isn't just like, I think at its most like simplistic, you know, oh, it's pretty, you know, it's like, this isn't about being pretty. This isn't about like picking a good like color combo, you know, it's like so much richer than that. And I think maybe in this moment where production is so easy, people are feeling compelled to articulate like, what is that distinction? And not just what does it mean in terms of how it manifests in a product, but what does it mean in terms of how it manifests in an organization? How do you sort of ingrain that in an organization? And even in your example, you know, we've also invested, obviously, I mean, Vercel's an example of this, but a lot of developer tools. You can talk about taste in how you've written the code, right? Like the senior engineers, like they're talking about taste, right? Things can churn out code, you know, pretty cheaply, and it's pretty good. What does it mean to exhibit sort of true taste in how you've built a system?
I think Cursor is a great example of this. You know, that's a founder who always talks about the purpose behind his products. And, you know, one could be overly reductionist and say, okay, well, this is just another ticketing system. But no, it's actually, to Kari and the team at Linear, it's a system of work. It's an organizing principle. It's a backbone that allows you to unleash creativity as a team. And they spend so much time thinking about the actual ergonomics of the buttons and the placement and how you feel when you create a ticket or finish a ticket, and the process of inviting new collaborators. I mean, they've put so much thought into that entire experience from end to end. I think underwriting all of this, you touched upon it, is just an obsession with the customer. It's not building software as, you know, an idea in the founder's brain that is unleashed into the world. It's actually the inverse. It's understanding the psychology of the customer.
The technology makes it possible to solve a problem. That's not the core differentiator. It's the how you wield the technology to solve the problem that actually comes back to this sort of deep understanding of the customer. So yeah, those folks who are, you know, by training or not, you know, the anthropologists, you know, and we've talked about the ability to evolve and change and, you know, pivot if you need to, burn the boats if you need to. You need that person that is able to tap into that pulse and then be able to put out a point of view. And I think that's at sort of the intersection of those things.
Yeah, something we were talking about on our last podcast, which got a lot of shout outs when we were talking about Heath Ceramics. The story and the narrative behind that company and its brand, and they are then able to charge premium prices for what is effectively a commoditized good, right? Dinnerware. I was listening to this great podcast, Acquired, and they were going through the history of LVMH. And I think they also did a podcast on Hermès. And it was all kind of connecting for me in my mind of just, why are those companies, you know, you could put Chanel in that bucket as well. Why are these companies able to charge such premium prices and command almost supernatural gross margins. These companies, I think, have maybe even close to software gross margins. And it's a lot of what we're talking about right now. It's the story, the brand, the narrative. It's, in the case of Hermès, it's this idea of a human has really been in the loop in building this leather handbag, and it's one of a kind, and you're never going to be able to see, it comes in a small quantity, and it's rare, it's aspirational. How do we build aspirational technology brands that can command premium unit economics in an era, as you said, where production has been commoditized, where everyone is going to be able to generate this code? And that's one thing I'm always so excited by when I meet a founder. It's when they've built a piece of technology and they can command extraordinary economics out of the gate. For one, it means it's a founder that really honors his or her innovation, right? You spent all your time building this. Like, you should get paid for that. But two, it's pricing can be a signal. Pricing can confer quality. And it's really tricky, I think, in this day and age where as founders, you want distribution as quickly as you can get it, and so you're willing to drop the floor on price. You'll take what you can get, and it's really difficult to actually go the other way and say, no, I've put craft and soul into this product, and it should command a premium price. And I think there's a lot to be learned around just traditional consumer franchises like an LVMH or Chanel or an Hermès around how do you do something like that, and that's hard. It's not. It's It certainly takes a more diverse set of skills. I've also just been thinking of how do you hire in for that earlier into your company's life cycle? I mean, we meet a lot of great young technical founders who think about the world in code. And we're talking about expressing your company, not just in terms of the code of its product, but also the almost narrative and purpose of its existence. And how those two things need to tie together. The Cursor team, I think, actually does a really, really phenomenal job of this. I mean, they want to breathe as much life into the Cursor name as they do into the beauty and the simplicity of their products. Vercel, another great example. And I think it shows up in the quality of their businesses, that they spend as much time investing in those intangibles. These are things that aren't going to show up immediately in your P&L, right? You can't look at the revenue line item and say, wow, that brand investment really paid off. But I think if you're thoughtful and patient with it, it's going to show up, and it's going to be a real differentiator, a real moat for you.
I do think it's why we're seeing more like founding designers.
Yeah.
Folks recognizing this. You would never, found the next great luxury, handbag company without sort of your founding designer, right? And so folks appreciating that out the gate, that's really critical for differentiation. It's also about being, I think, consistent and truthful and reliable with your customer,
Right.
like expectation setting and then meeting that, right?
Right.
I'm thinking of IKEA, right?
Yeah.
This is not like premium, but do they kind of deliver consistently and own a category, and have they made an enormous business off of that? So I think, and have a very strong brand and brand identity, right?
Sure.
So I think the real trap is not knowing who you are, knowing what strategy you're executing. Are we going premium? Are we not? From what basis are we trying to expand? Like going from the cheapening your product and then thinking later you can really, change altitude dramatically versus, inch your way up.
Sure.
But I think the most important thing is being sort of consistent expectation setting, presenting as you are, and then following through on that. People love people and brands that are reliable and consistent and do what they say.
It reminds me of the old Jeff Bezos quote. I think there's a lot of things that are changing in this world, and there are a couple things that stay the same. And we should stack all of our innovation behind those things that are staying the same. And in this case, it was consumer happiness. It was deliveries on time. It was getting, the right SKU that you actually ordered, and just that level of customer service, and, innovating behind the things that stay the same, I think is another side to what you're talking about, of just consistency and reliability. And Yeah, it's really, we meet so many great founders that are thinking about innovating on the horizon. And a lot of what we're discussing now are kind of almost like basic building blocks that may not necessarily be top of mind, but I think we're both articulating how critical they are to start thinking about arguably earlier in the company's life cycle.
1,000%, 1,000%. Because in this market, it's going to be such a differentiator. It will be part of why you win or lose, for sure, without doubt.
Yeah.
I guess like a piece of advice and sort of a preference, and I wonder where you stand on this in terms of engaging with founders during a fundraise process. But I actually love when founders sort of peel back the curtain a bit more about how they got to where the company is. Yeah. I find sometimes folks feel like they need to be so buttoned up that they're just like very dialed on the snapshot of the moment in time. And when I get really excited in some cases is when they take me through that thinking process of we tried this, that didn't work. We had this, we took it away, we edited it out because it wasn't that effective. That meandering actually is so rich in data about how folks display their taste in a category, how they display their understanding of a customer. And I think my advice to founders, stemming from this conversation is just not to sort of deny the conversation of that richness, because it can be so revealing of how you think and how you work and how you understand your user, that if you try and just be super buttoned in this moment, you're missing an opportunity to really reveal how you think and how you work. And oftentimes that piece of like, hey, let's go down the path not taken. What did you do? What did you learn? And it might feel like a non sequitur to the founder. Like, why does this VC want to keep talking about what I'm not doing? But it actually is so revealing.
I totally agree with you.
So I think for founders listening out there, hopefully saying like, we're not looking for everything to be like the perfect, the buttoned up, this is exactly what it is and what it was always meant to be and how we always thought it would be. We know that that's not how these things work. We work with enough early stage companies to know there's twists and turns. So take us on the journey. Let us see how you think and how you express yourself through your product.
No, I love that. There's so much to the origin story of a founder that sometimes we have to spend time pulling out of them during the pitch. And I think to your point, it should be a natural chapter in the story that you're telling about your company. Every Harry Potter started in some closet under a set of stairs, but those are formative years that really teach you something. They ignite something in you, right? They expose your passion in some ways. And, we are often, I think, pulling those origin stories out of founders. But I think what you're saying is spot on. It should be a core chapter in your fundraising pitch. If anything, it should be maybe the majority of the story that you're telling, because the reason that you are starting this company is everything that we are betting on. We are betting on you as a person and this existential need to bend the world in a certain way. And we're going to best be able to assess that and understand that if we understand what was your origin story, what led you to this insight, what led you to this deep and burning need to create this thing. And all of that, I think, comes back to all the things that we're talking about around brand and taste and design, which is, I think, increasingly consumers aren't just buying that end product. They're buying kind of the story and the narrative behind it. And great founders are going to be able to find a way to let that unleash as part of the company that they're building. Well, I think that's all the time that we have for today. Awesome chatting with you, Sarah. As always, we will see you next time on VBSR.
Thanks for coming.